Welcome. Welcome, everyone, and welcome to you, Ambassador Corrêa de Lago. It's a pleasure to start the day with you here.
Hi.
You know, a lot of people, well-meaning people who want to see global climate action, tell me, or they ask me, you know, what is the point of all these COPs? People come, thousands of people come, they talk, they have to agree on everything by consensus, which means one or two countries effectively have a veto. There are oil company executives who come as part of delegations. They make some promises and then they don't keep them. How would you address these concerns about the next COP of which you are president?
Yeah. Well, that's a frequent question. And I have to say, I've talked a lot about that with President Lula, because President Lula asked me that same question. He said, why are we going to do a COP? What can we do with this COP? And it's a bit like a parliament, you know? It's like you see lots of people talking, discussing, and then you have lobbying, and you have all these things. But at the end, you have a law. You have international legislation. You have international decisions that point to a direction where we should go. So I think this is what, when you had the first agreement in Rio in 1992, the Convention on Climate Change, we decided that we were going to look at climate change with another eye. And thanks to that convention, then you had more scientists, you had more support for all the countries to measure their contribution to climate change. What could they do against climate change? And this evolution of science and technology and legislation is thanks to these COPs.
Should oil company executives be part of COP?
Everybody that has an economic interest in this discussion has to be there. And it's true that in the beginning, it was the UN meteorological organization that started the discussion, because in the beginning we thought it was something, we didn't understand fully, even when we signed the convention. And little by little, it became an amazing economic debate. And today, I think that the evolution of this discussion is concentrated on economics.
So I think you're saying, yes, whoever wants to come, including oil and gas company executives, can come. Should there be some discussion about how decisions are made? This issue of consensus, as you know, holds up decisions till the last minute, and usually one or two countries block consensus.
Yeah.
Should that be opened up? Should there be voting?
I think it's extremely frustrating, even more for negotiators or probably for the president of the COP. But this issue of the consensus is also what gives strength to the decisions. So when we decided 2 years ago in Dubai that we're going to transition away from fossil fuels, you have a consensus, a world consensus on this sentence. This is extremely strong, as is much stronger than if everybody agrees except the main oil-producing countries, or if you have another decision on another dimension of climate change. Consensus brings enormous strength, but I agree, brings also lots of frustration.
I'm glad you brought up what happened in Dubai. It took 28 years to reach that consensus, that there should be a transition away from fossil fuels in a just and orderly manner. That doesn't seem to be happening.
It's debatable. It's debatable. Yeah.
Should there be a roadmap, a very specific roadmap at this COP, giving countries a direction on how to make that transition happen?
If it's possible to get a consensus on the idea of a roadmap, I think it would be an interesting thing. Yeah.
That seems likely or unlikely to you?
I think it would be welcomed by civil society, certainly. It will be welcomed by the economy in the countries, because the transition to a cleaner world is very complex. In many countries, it's very expensive, but it brings lots of opportunities. And we've seen that with China.
I'm going to come back to that. Let's stick to what you think is deliverable at this COP, okay? One of the expectations, particularly by climate vulnerable countries, is finance. $300 billion a year is expected. I think some countries will call this COP a failure if there's not that tangible delivery. Countries have cut aid budgets, the United States, for example, but also other countries. For that $300 billion climate finance goal, what are 2 or 3 tangible ways to mobilize that money?
Well, this is a complex issue, and as you know, I have to deliver with the president of COP29 a roadmap for reaching 1.3 trillion by 2035. Which we will present like 1 week before the COP.
That's an even bigger number. I'm starting with a small number, 300 billion.
Yeah. 300 billion is what was approved.
Yeah.
We have to remember, first of all, is that the main developing countries, China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, everything that we have been doing to fight climate change, almost everything is not with money that came from developed countries. It's from our own budgets. So when people think, oh, the US is going to stop giving money, it's not that they were giving lots of money, neither the Europeans or the others. I think that international cooperation is extremely important for more vulnerable countries and for countries where you have economies that cannot switch to a cleaner economy without international support. Now, a country like Brazil or India that are doing lots of things with their own budget, we could do infinitely more if we had access to capital. So access to capital is something that is absolutely essential. We're thinking also of reduction of debt with debt for nature swaps. We're thinking of international solidarity levies. We have to think of all the instruments possible. And why? Because there is one element that completely changed, I think, the way we have to look at these negotiations, is urgency. So if we believe in science, which is a reasonable proposal, we have to do things in the next 5-7 years. And why? Because everything that we're going to do earlier is going to have a bigger impact. So sometimes some countries are, they look at things as if they had to be perfect. So, no, we have to wait to have the perfect technology. No, because the best technology in 10 years is not going to have the effect that what we do now with the technologies that exist. So I think that urgency is the key word for these negotiations.
And you mentioned 3 concrete things. 1, access to capital, de-risking some of that capital, perhaps. You mentioned debt for nature swaps and debt arrangements, and you mentioned a solidarity levy, which, if I understand correctly, is a proposal.
These are all proposals. Yeah.
To tax very wealthy individuals.
Or products. Or activities. You saw now in Seville, there was a group of 8 countries that started a tax on business and first class and private jets.
Right. You have alluded to this already this morning. There is one country that has pulled out of the Paris Agreement, and that is the United States. What have you heard from the United States about its participation this year? Chris Wright said in a recent interview, and we will hear from Energy Secretary Chris Wright here later today, he said in a recent interview, quote, "I would not be at all against going if I had an audience and a platform to engage with the world." He has, of course, also called the Paris Agreement, quote, "silly," and he has said an agreement to get to net zero by 2040 is, quote, "a crazy bad idea." What is your message to the U.S. Energy Secretary about a possible participation in COP?
First, that I tend to disagree with him, but then I would also say that he is most welcome, because all the arguments, I think it's very interesting, because Secretary Wright has never denied climate change provoked by human activities. He never denied that. He denies the economics of the fight against climate change. He's quite positive regarding adaptation, for instance, that he believes that things are happening, so we have to do something. But mitigation, he believes it's too expensive for mitigation. I think this is what we have to discuss. That's what we have to discuss with oil companies. That's what we have to discuss with many sectors of the economy that are understandably a little frightened of this transition.
When we spoke a couple of months ago in Chicago, you said, you know, the consequences of a COP30 without the U.S. is less worrying than some might think. If the U.S. does not send a delegation to the talks, is that a big problem, or will it just make it easier for other countries to get down to business?
No, the U.S. already said they're leaving. And formally, it's a formality in the rules of the Paris Agreement. You have to wait 1 year to really get out. So 1 year is going to be in January. So we would perfectly understand that since they announced that they are not going to participate, that they are not going to continue in the Paris Agreement, that they are not there. But if they come and they are still members of the convention, they will be very welcome, because I think this is the opportunity that the whole world is looking at climate change. So let's talk about it openly, transparently. I think this is the best thing we have to do about that, and the COP is the big opportunity for that.
You heard President Trump talking about climate change openly yesterday at the General Assembly. Yeah. Your reaction to those remarks?
We are analyzing the speech.
What message does that send the world? In all seriousness, what did you think of that? And the choice of the General Assembly to deliver those remarks?
President Trump spoke about many things, and with lots of very personal interpretations of many things. So I think it has to be seen in that context. I think that although obviously I believe in climate change, I believe in science, etc., etc., but it's useless to be right. At this stage, we cannot think, I'm right and I'm doing the right thing. I mean, I think it's quite useless. What we have is to convince those that are reluctant. And who are the reluctant ones? The reluctant ones are the ones that see that this is not an opportunity for business, that this is not going to work, that this is a bad idea. That's a bit what he alluded to, talking about Europe, the impact on the price of energy, etc., etc. And it's a very serious subject, because we've seen in democracies that many voters don't believe that it's worth increasing the price of their energy to fight something that you don't know if it's really working. So I think it's a fair discussion. So I think that those who believe in climate change, like I hope most of you, we have to have better arguments. We have to have better numbers. We have to show how technology has advanced, how examples work, how many things are working. And that's why at the COP, we have the natural negotiation, which is the main thing about the COP. But we also have a summit. President Lula will host a summit 3 days before, also in Belém, in which we're going to discuss openly, by the way, about energy and forests, for instance. So we have the negotiations, we have the summit, but we also have the action agenda. And the action agenda, what is the action agenda? Is that we want this COP to be seen as a COP of implementation. Many COPs have already said they are COPs of implementation. But in that case, it can be true, believe it or not. It can be true for a simple reason, is that when we decided to negotiate Paris and we decided to negotiate some things, in fact, we have already negotiated what we call the Paris Rulebook. So we have already the legislation that we intended to have with Paris. Now we have to implement. But most people think that COPs are a never-ending exercise of negotiation. So let's continue to negotiate some of the things that we still have to negotiate, but let's implement what has already been agreed. So the action agenda brings to the COP people that cannot negotiate. So it's subnational governments, the business sector, civil society, academia. So we're going to have like a parallel COP discussing solutions, showing how many examples work, how many things can be done already with the technology we have today and with the regulation that we have created with the COPs.
And this is, as you were saying, this is part of your trying to make the case, trying to bring people along who do not.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
What impact has the U.S. repudiation of climate action, the reversals, what impact has that had on the rest of the world? Do you find that it's been contagious? You've traveled to capitals everywhere. What are you seeing and hearing there?
Yeah. First, it's not the U.S. It's the U.S. government at the moment, because we see so many governors that are still going to follow what the Paris Accord, the line of the Paris Accord. We see so many businesses, and most of those who have international interest continuing to follow the rules of the Paris Accord. So if you talk about the U.S. is out, it's not the U.S. that is out. If you just get the governors that still support the Paris Agreement, you probably have 60 or 70% of the U.S. GDP.
Point taken, but the U.S. national policies have witnessed a very sharp reversal. So my question to you is, what are you hearing from other capitals? Are they following the U.S. lead and saying, well, maybe not push ahead on renewables so fast? Or are you hearing something else?
Well, first, no other country left the Paris Accord. So this is, I think, already a sign. But I think that all countries are conscious that we have to explain better to our people and internationally. Maybe this is one of the explanations why people are taking so long to present their NDCs. So today we're going to have an event with more than 100 countries that will probably present their NDCs.
Their next climate targets, their 2035 climate targets.
And the climate targets, that should have been presented in February, and everybody's a bit late. I think that most countries understand this is really very serious business, because the plans of reduction of emissions is what is going to direct investments in the countries. So we are always coming back to economics. If we don't have good economics, we're not going to convince the most important actors.
Are you seeing backsliding in the other major economies around the world as a result of the U.S. federal administration's reversals?
Not yet.
What are you seeing?
What I'm seeing is that all the, 70 or 80% of the world's emissions are related to energy. Investments in energy are long-term investments. So there are lots of investments that already started, and many investments that will only start to work after the Trump 4 years. So people look at it in a longer context than in a period of an American president. So I think that everybody's looking at their very specific circumstances. That's why we talk about transitions. We need to have transitions. Obviously, they are different from country to country. In a country like Brazil, which is huge, even each region has a different transition, like in the US. So, for instance, the solar and wind make sense in Texas, no, but it may not make sense in other places.
Do you expect Xi Jinping to come to Belém?
he's invited, and we would be delighted if he comes.
What role is China playing at the moment in the global energy transition? What are the opportunities that China presents, and what are some of the risks?
Yeah. China can be seen from, many people look at China. Now it's the biggest emitter. It's true. But at the same time, China is the country that clearly believes more in the economic interest of fighting climate change. So the technological advances they made with solar, with wind, with batteries, with EVs, I mean, it's simply amazing because the prices went so down that now everywhere in the world, solar is the least expensive energy in all countries in the world. So, and that's thanks to China's scale, technology, capacity, etc. So China has these two things, but they are clearly engaged in the new economy, in this economy that is going to bet on reducing emissions. That's the opportunity. Are there risks, especially for emerging economy countries like yours? Look, Brazil is a very special case because we have a very strange emission pattern because we have the lowest emissions of energy because we have 90% renewables in electricity, which is amazing. But at the same time, our main emissions are still deforestation. So we reduced 50% during this Lula government, and we're continuing to reduce. And we have President Lula has committed that Brazil will have zero deforestation by 2030. Brazil has come under some criticism, mainly from Brazilian environmental groups, for its decision to expand oil production. Just before COP, Brazil issued new drilling permits in the Amazon basin. How do you reconcile those things, being a climate leader and expanding oil? Yeah. Well, Brazil is a democracy. We have an amazing civil society, and this is a huge debate in Brazil, which is fair. So let's see how it evolves. The government itself is divided because there are some sectors of the government that believe more in oil than others. But even if you get the Minister of Energy, he is absolutely conscious that the world has committed to transition away from fossil fuels. So what do you do until you reach net zero? How do you do it? This is for each country to choose its own path. And many people argue that countries that have difficulty to access credit internationally, they may get credit for oil projects and use the money of the oil for positive phase in that transition. So there are many ways of interpreting, and I believe that it's an internal debate that is really quite exciting in Brazil. We've heard that justification, of course, from all oil-producing states, that we will use the revenues for good. It's hard to see how that is consistent with keeping global emissions to well below 2 degrees Celsius. You mentioned that deforestation is one of your primary sources of emissions in Brazil. There's a very interesting agreement to create a forest fund. Tell us a little bit about how that forest fund works and how is it different? What is the point of it? We've had lots of funds before to stop deforestation or to plant trees on degraded lands. How is this different? Now, that's a really important thing. When you look at forests, and Brazil has the largest tropical forest in the world, and the preserved Amazon biome today in Brazil is larger than India. So it's really huge. It has only 15 million people there. So we know a lot about forestry. And we did lots of mistakes for years and years. And projects that did not take into consideration the biome. But now, and discussing with many tropical forest countries, there are like 70, there are basically 3 needs. One, is resources to reduce deforestation. Mm-hmm. And there, under the convention, under the discussions of climate change, you have REDD+, and
that's where developed countries give money. Yeah.
That's it.
What is the new thing, and I'm keeping an eye on the clock here, what is the new thing about
so
this?
So REDD+ exists for deforestation. Mm-hmm. Then when we think of restoration, restoration is something that since it captures CO2 that is already in the atmosphere, it should be a perfect case for carbon market. So it's another logic. But then you have conservation of forests. And conservation of forests had no structure, had no fund specifically for that. And that's what we launched.
That's what this is.
CFFF. Yesterday, President Lula announced not only that it's very well structured, it's under the World Bank. The president of World Bank was together with President Lula yesterday for the announcement. And President Lula announced that Brazil will be the first to put $1 billion in that
into fund. This fund. So this is a new fund to
it's
keep
a new
forests
fund with
standing.
a different logic because it's about conservation. So it's not only climate, it's also biodiversity, and it's also the preservation of life of the peoples from the forest. So, and it's going to be measured thanks to technology by hectare, can be easily verified, and I think this is going to be an amazing step.
It's a great note on which to end. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.